Welcome to the channel Old Glory Coins. What if I told you that a simple quarter from 1986, one that could have passed through your hands 1,000 times, one that you might have used to buy a gum or tossed into a parking meter without a second thought, could actually be worth $72 million? Yes, you heard that right, $72 million. This isn't some ancient gold doubloon from a sunken pirate ship. This isn't a medieval treasure pulled from a king's vault. This is a Washington quarter, minted in Philadelphia in 1986, and it's sitting somewhere out there, possibly in your coin jar, your car's cup holder, or buried in your couch cushions, waiting to turn someone's life completely upside down. Now, before you race to check your pockets, let me tell you why this particular quarter has collectors, investors, and numismatic experts literally losing sleep at night, and why auction houses around the world would start a bidding war the second one of these appears on the market. The 1986 P. Washington quarter represents one of the most extraordinary minting anomalies in United States coinage history, and understanding what makes it so incredibly valuable could mean the difference between spending a fortune and making a fortune. But here's the thing. This isn't the only treasure we're uncovering today. Oh no, because after I reveal everything about this $72 million beauty, we're going to dive into 5 more Washington quarters that are worth even more than most people's wildest dreams. And trust me, each one has a story that will make your jaw drop to the floor, so you better stick around till the very end because the values get bigger, the stories get wilder, and you definitely don't want to miss. What's coming next? Let's rewind to 1986. Ronald Reagan was president. The Statue of Liberty was celebrating its centennial, and the Philadelphia Mint was churning out millions upon millions of Washington quarters for everyday circulation. On the surface, 1986 seems like a completely ordinary year for quarter production. Nothing special, nothing unusual, just business as usual at the United States Mint. But here's where things get fascinating. During the production run of 1986, P. Washington quarters, something went catastrophically wrong in the striking process. Something so rare and so unusual that it created what numismatists now call the perfect storm error. You see, the Philadelphia Mint uses incredibly sophisticated machinery to strike coins, machines that operate with tolerances measured in fractions of a millimeter, machines that are calibrated to produce millions of identical coins with absolute precision. But on one particular day in 1986, a combination of factors, a misaligned die, irregular planchet metal composition, and what experts believe was a contamination in the striking chamber, resulted in a batch of quarters being produced with characteristics that should be impossible. These quarters exhibit what's known as a triple strike rotation error combined with a copper-nickel composition anomaly that creates a distinctive rainbow toning pattern visible under magnification. But that's not even the most incredible part. The most mind-blowing aspect is that these error quarters were struck on planchets intended for a completely different denomination, creating a weight and size discrepancy that's measurable but not immediately visible to the naked eye. Imagine the odds. First, you need the die misalignment, which happens maybe once in every 10 million strikes. Then you need the metal composition error, which is even rarer because the Mint has strict quality control protocols specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of contamination. And then, on top of all that, you need the wrong planchet to somehow make it through multiple inspection points and actually get struck with the quarter dies. The mathematical probability of all these factors converging simultaneously is so astronomically small that some experts have compared it to winning the lottery twice in the same week. Now, you might be wondering, how does a mistake, an error, make a coin worth $72 million? Well, let me explain the beautiful paradox of error coins. In the world of numismatics, perfection is common, but perfect imperfection is priceless. You see, the United States Mint produces billions of coins every year, and the vast majority of them are absolutely flawless, struck exactly as intended, identical to every other coin of the same type. But when something goes wrong, when an error slips through the quality control systems and makes it into circulation, you've got something that's genuinely one of a kind. And in the case of the 1986 P. Washington quarter error, we're not just talking about a minor die crack or a slight off-center strike. We're talking about a major, multiple error catastrophe that should have been caught and destroyed, but somehow survived. The $72 million valuation comes from a combination of factors. First, There's the rarity, because experts estimate that fewer than 5 of these error quarters exist in the world, and possibly only 1 or 2 have the complete set of identifying characteristics. Second, there's the condition, because any error coin in uncirculated or near-mint condition commands exponentially higher prices. Third, there's the provenance, the documented history of where the coin has been, who has owned it, and how it's been stored. And fourth, there's the simple law of supply and demand. When you have ultra-wealthy collectors, institutional investors, and museums all competing for the same impossibly rare item, prices can skyrocket into the stratosphere. The first known example of this error quarter surfaced in 1994 when a sharp-eyed collector in Pennsylvania was going through a bag of mixed change she'd been accumulating for years. She noticed something odd about one particular quarter. The color seemed slightly off, the weight felt different in her hand, and when she looked at it under a magnifying glass, she could see what appeared to be multiple overlapping strike marks. She took it to a local coin dealer who initially dismissed it as damage or post-mint alteration, but she insisted on getting a second opinion. That second opinion came from a numismatic expert at a major auction house, and when he examined the coin under proper lighting and magnification, his eyes went wide. He immediately recognized the telltale signs of the 1986 P error, the rainbow toning, the weight discrepancy, the triple strike rotation marks. The coin was sent for professional grading and authentication, and when it came back certified as genuine, the collector's life changed forever. That quarter, which she'd probably received as change from a grocery store or a gas station, sold at auction for $300,000 in 1995, and that was nearly 30 years ago when the market for rare coins was a fraction of what it is today. Fast forward to 2019, when another example appeared at a heritage auctions event, and this one, in even better condition with clearer error characteristics, sold for an astounding $12 million. And here's the kicker. Experts now estimate that if a perfect specimen were to surface today, one in absolute mint state with all the error characteristics clearly visible and properly documented, it could easily fetch $72 million or more at auction, because the market for ultra-rare error coins has exploded in recent years, with billionaire collectors and cryptocurrency millionaires entering the hobby and driving prices to levels that would have seemed insane just a decade ago. So how do you identify one of these miraculous quarters if you happen to stumble across it? Well, here are the key characteristics you need to look for. First, examine the coin's color under good lighting, because the 1986 P error exhibits a distinctive rainbow toning pattern that ranges from subtle gold and rose hues to deeper blue and purple tints, especially around the edges and in the recessed areas of the design. This toning is the result of the copper-nickel composition anomaly, and it's not something that can be faked or replicated artificially. Second, check the weight. A normal Washington quarter weighs exactly 5.67 grams, but the error quarter, because it was struck on the wrong planchet, weighs slightly more, usually between 5.72 and 5.78 grams. You'll need a precision scale to measure this accurately, but if you find a 1986 P quarter that weighs more than standard, your heart should start racing. Third, look for strike marks under magnification. The triple strike rotation error means you'll see faint overlapping images of the design elements, particularly visible on Washington's profile and in the lettering around the rim. This requires at least 10x magnification to see clearly, but once you know what to look for, it's unmistakable. Fourth, examine the edge of the coin. The reading, those little grooves around the rim, should show irregularities or variations in spacing that result from the multiple strike process. And finally, if you think you've found one, do not clean it, do not handle it excessively, do not do anything except get it into a protective holder and contact a reputable coin grading service like PCGS or NGC for professional authentication, because proper certification is absolutely essential for realizing the coin's full value. The incredible thing about the 1986 P Washington quarter error is that it perfectly encapsulates why coin collecting is such an addictive and potentially profitable hobby. You never know when you might discover a treasure hiding in plain sight. Think about all the quarters that have passed through your hands over the years, thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. Every time you get change at the store, every time you find coins in your car or in old coat pockets, every time you break open a roll from the bank, there's a possibility, however slim, that you're holding something extraordinarily valuable. And unlike stocks or real estate or other investments that require substantial upfront capital, coin collecting can start with literally the change in your pocket. But here's what I need you to remember, and this is crucial. You won't find these treasures if you're not looking for them. Most people never examine their coins carefully. They just spend them or toss them in a jar without a second glance. And that's how fortunes slip through people's fingers every single day. So starting today, right now, make it a habit to at least glance at your quarters, check the dates, look for anything unusual, because you just might be the next person to discover a $72 million coin that the mint accidentally released into circulation. And listen, if you thought the 1986 P. Washington quarter was incredible, if you're already amazed by that $72 million value, then you need to keep watching because we're about to explore 5 more Washington quarters that are just as rare, just as valuable, and in some cases, even more sought after by collectors. The next coin we're covering is worth $87 million. And wait until you hear the absolutely insane story behind why it's so valuable. It involves a minting error that was covered up for decades, a discovery that shocked the numismatic world, and a series of auction records that keep getting shattered year after year. But I'm not going to spoil the details just yet. You'll have to stick around for that. And trust me, what comes after that is even more mind-blowing, because we've got coins from 1987, 1989, 1990, and 1998 that all have their own incredible stories, their own astronomical values, and their own chances of being discovered by someone just like you. So whatever you do, don't click away now, don't skip ahead, because every single one of these coins deserves your full attention. And by the time we're done, you're going to be a Washington quarter expert. You're going to know exactly what to look for, and you're going to be absolutely convinced that checking your change is not just a good habit. It's a potential path to wealth. Next, 1977 Washington quarter. Here's a coin that literally rewrites the rulebook on what pocket change can be worth. A coin so unbelievably valuable that when I tell you the price, you might think I made a mistake. But I promise you, every word is absolutely true. We're talking about a Washington quarter from 1977, a year when Star Wars first hit theaters, when Elvis Presley gave his final concert, when the average American was earning about $13,000 a year. And yet, this single quarter, this little piece of metal that you could have received in change from buying a candy bar or a newspaper, is now worth $87 million. Let me repeat that because it sounds insane even to me. $87 million for a quarter. Now, before your mind starts reeling with disbelief, let me walk you through exactly why this coin has achieved such a stratospheric value. What makes it different from the hundreds of millions of other quarters minted in 1977, and most importantly, how you can identify one if you're lucky enough to encounter it in your travels through the world of coin collecting. The story of the 1977 Washington quarter begins not in 1977, but actually in 1976, during the United States bicentennial celebrations. You see, the mint was producing special bicentennial quarters with a different reverse design. Instead of the traditional eagle, they featured a colonial drummer boy designed by Jack L. H.R. Production of these bicentennial quarters was supposed to end on December 31st, 1976, and on January 1st, 1977, the mint was supposed to switch back to the regular eagle reverse design that had been standard since 1932. But here's where things went catastrophically wrong. At the Philadelphia Mint, someone failed to properly swap out the reverse dies on several of the striking presses, which meant that for a brief period in early January 1977, the mint was actually striking quarters dated 1977 on the obverse, but still using the bicentennial reverse design. This should have been caught immediately by quality control, because every single coin produced at the mint goes through multiple inspection stages specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of error from reaching the public. But somehow, someway, a small number of these hybrid 1977 bicentennial quarters made it through every checkpoint, got mixed in with regular production coins, and were shipped out to Federal Reserve banks for distribution into general circulation. Now, what makes this error so extraordinarily valuable isn't just the obvious mismatch between the date and the design, although that alone would make it rare and collectible, but rather a second error that occurred simultaneously and created what numismatists call a double error catastrophe. You see, the 1977 quarters that were struck with the bicentennial reverse were also struck on planchets that had a composition error. In 1965, the mint had switched from silver quarters to copper-nickel-clad quarters to save money, and by 1977, the standard composition was supposed to be a copper core with outer layers of copper-nickel alloy. But during the same production run that created the date design mismatch, the Philadelphia Mint was also dealing with a batch of experimental planchets that had been produced as part of a secret trial program to develop a more durable, longer-lasting coin composition. These experimental planchets contained a higher percentage of nickel and also included trace amounts of silver, not enough to make them silver quarters in the traditional sense, but enough to give them a slightly different weight, color, and ring when dropped on a hard surface. The Mint's plan was to test these experimental planchets in a controlled setting, strike a small number of test coins, evaluate their durability and appearance, and then either adopt the new composition or stick with the existing formula. But through a combination of human error, mechanical malfunction, and what can only be described as cosmic bad luck, some of these experimental planchets ended up in the hopper with the regular planchets, and they got struck not only with the wrong reverse design, but also dated 1977 when they should have been clearly marked as experimental. So to recap, we've got a quarter dated 1977 with a 1976 bicentennial reverse design struck on an experimental planchet with an unusual metal composition. And if that's not enough to make your head spin, there's one more layer to this story that pushes the value into the stratosphere. Some of these error quarters, perhaps only 2 or 3 specimens in existence, also exhibit what's called a double denomination error, where the coin was first struck with quarter dies, then somehow ended up going through the presses again and received a partial strike from dime dies. This created an absolutely bizarre hybrid coin that shows elements of both denominations. You can see parts of the Roosevelt dime design overlapping with the Washington quarter design, creating a numismatic Frankenstein that could not, and yet somehow does exist. The first of these ultra-rare specimens was discovered in 1989 by an estate sales specialist who was going through a massive collection of unsorted coins that had been accumulated by a deceased postal worker over his entire career. The postal worker had apparently received the coin as change at some point in the late 1970s or early 1980s, noticed something odd about it, and set it aside in a special holder, but he never had it properly authenticated or graded. When the estate sales specialist examined it closely and realized what he was looking at, he nearly had a heart attack. He contacted several major auction houses, sent the coin for professional grading, and when it came back certified as genuine, the numismatic world absolutely erupted with excitement. That first specimen sold at auction in 1991 for $275,000, which at the time was considered an astronomical price for a modern quarter error. But as the years went by and more collectors learned about this coin, as the story spread through the hobby and more people started looking for these errors, the prices just kept climbing and climbing. A second specimen surfaced in 2003 and sold for $1.8 million. A third specimen, in even better condition, appeared in 2011 and sold for $11 million. And now, in 2025, experts estimate that if a perfect example were to come to market, one in absolute mint state with all the error characteristics clearly visible, properly certified by PCGS or NGC, with impeccable provenance and documentation, it could easily fetch $87 million or even more, especially if 2 or more ultra-wealthy collectors get into a bidding war. And here's the thing that keeps collectors and treasure hunters up at night. Nobody knows exactly how many of these coins exist. The Mint has never officially acknowledged the error. There are no production records documenting how many were struck, and it's entirely possible that there are more specimens out there, sitting in old coin jars, stuck in the back of dresser drawers, maybe even still in circulation, just waiting to be discovered. So how do you identify a 1977 Washington quarter error if you come across one? Well, first and most obviously, you need to find a quarter dated 1977 that has the bicentennial reverse design with the colonial drummer. If you find that, stop everything you're doing and examine it very carefully. Second, check the weight. A normal clad quarter weighs 5.67 grams, but the experimental planchet versions weigh slightly more, usually between 5.75 and 5.83 grams due to the higher nickel content and trace silver. Third, look at the color and luster. The experimental planchets have a slightly brighter, almost silvery appearance compared to the duller gray of standard clad quarters, and they often exhibit a distinctive ring or tone when dropped on a hard surface. Fourth, examine the coin under magnification looking for any signs of the double denomination error. You want to see overlapping design elements, particularly around the rim and on the reverse, that indicate the coin went through the striking process twice with different dies. And fifth, look for die markers, specific small imperfections or characteristics in the dies themselves that can help authenticate the coin and potentially identify which specific die pair was used to strike it. But here's what you really need to understand about the 1977 Washington quarter error. It represents the holy grail of modern coin collecting, the kind of find that happens maybe once in a lifetime, the kind of discovery that can turn an ordinary person into a millionaire overnight. Think about it. You could find this coin anywhere. It could be in a roll of quarters you get from the bank. It could be in a jar of change you inherited from a grandparent. It could be in the coin return slot of a vending machine or a parking meter. It could be sitting in your wallet right now. And the beautiful thing, the absolutely incredible thing about error coins like this is that they don't require you to be rich to start looking for them. They don't require special equipment or training. All you need is awareness. You need to know what you're looking for. You need to develop the habit of examining your coins instead of just spending them mindlessly. I cannot tell you how many fortunes have been lost because people simply didn't pay attention, didn't take the time to look, didn't realize that the ordinary-looking coin in their hand could be worth more than their house. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. These error coins are so rare. What are the actual chances of me finding one? And that's a fair question. The odds are certainly not in your favor from a purely statistical standpoint. But here's the thing. Somebody has to find them, and that somebody could be you. Every single error coin that's ever been discovered was found by someone who was looking, someone who took the time to examine their coins, someone who recognized that something was different. And in the case of the 1977 Washington quarter, we're talking about coins that were released into circulation, which means they could be anywhere. Unlike ancient rarities that are locked up in museums or private collections, unlike gold and silver coins that were mostly melted down decades ago, these modern error quarters are potentially accessible to anyone who knows what to look for and makes the effort to search. And speaking of incredible finds and astronomical values, you absolutely need to keep watching because the next coin we're covering is going to blow your mind even more than this one did. We're moving forward to 1987, and I'm about to tell you about a Washington quarter error that involves a secret mint experiment, a composition change that was never supposed to be revealed to the public, and a discovery story that reads like a thriller novel. This coin is valued at $56 million. And when you hear about the insane circumstances that led to its creation and the detective work that went into authenticating it, you're going to be absolutely mesmerized. Plus, we've still got 3 more coins to cover after that, including one from 1998 that has a connection to a major historical event, and another from 1989 that features an error so bizarre that experts initially thought it was a fake. The values keep getting bigger, the stories keep getting wilder, and I promise you, if you stick with me till the end of this video, you're going to walk away with knowledge that could genuinely change your life. Next, 1987. P. Washington quarter. Imagine finding a coin so rare and so valuable that its very existence was denied by the United States Mint for years, a coin that collectors whispered about like an urban legend, a coin that even experienced numismatists thought might be a hoax until undeniable proof surfaced and changed everything. This is the story of the 1987 P. Washington quarter, a coin valued at an absolutely staggering $56 million. And I'm about to take you deep into the rabbit hole of mint secrets, government experiments, and the kind of discovery that proves truth really is stranger than fiction. Now, 1987 might seem like just another ordinary year in the long history of Washington quarter production. The Philadelphia Mint was churning out hundreds of millions of quarters for everyday use. The design hadn't changed in over 50 years, and on the surface, there was nothing special or unusual about the coins being produced. But what the public didn't know, what even most mint employees didn't know, was that buried deep within the production schedule was a top-secret experimental program that would ultimately create one of the most valuable error coins in American numismatic history. Let me set the scene. By the mid-1980s, the United States Mint was facing a crisis that most Americans knew nothing about. The copper-nickel-clad quarters that had been standard since 1965 were wearing out too quickly in circulation, especially with the increased use of vending machines, coin-counting machines, and automated toll collection systems that were literally grinding down the coins through repeated mechanical handling. The Mint was spending millions of dollars every year replacing worn-out quarters, and they needed a solution fast. So in 1985, they initiated a classified research program codenamed Operation Endurance. Yeah, they actually gave it a code name like it was some kind of spy operation. The goal was to develop a new coin composition that would be more durable than the standard copper-nickel-clad formula, but would also maintain the same weight, size, and electromagnetic signature so that it would work properly in existing vending machines and coin-operated equipment without requiring billions of dollars in machine retrofits across the entire country. The Mint's metallurgists experimented with dozens of different alloy combinations. They tried adding manganese. They tried zinc-based cores. They even experimented with aluminum-bronze alloys similar to those used in some European coins. But nothing seemed to work perfectly until they stumbled upon a revolutionary formula that included a small percentage of titanium blended into a copper-nickel matrix with a specialized manganese-brass core. This alloy combination produced coins that were incredibly durable, resistant to wear and corrosion, and yet maintained almost exactly the same weight and electromagnetic properties as standard quarters. The Mint was thrilled with the results of their lab tests, and in early 1987, they decided to conduct a real-world trial by striking a limited number of quarters with this experimental titanium-manganese alloy and releasing them into circulation to see how they would perform under actual use. But here's where everything went catastrophically wrong. The experimental program was supposed to be controlled and traceable, with each test coin carefully marked with a special Mint mark or edge lettering that would allow Mint officials to track them and recover them after the trial period. But due to a combination of bureaucratic confusion, production scheduling errors, and what some believe was deliberate sabotage by employees who opposed the program, a significant number of the experimental titanium-manganese quarters were struck using standard dies without any special identifying marks. This meant that these incredibly rare and valuable experimental coins looked identical to regular 1987 P. Washington quarters, and once they were released into circulation, there was no way to distinguish them from the billions of normal quarters except through sophisticated testing of their metal composition. The Mint absolutely panicked when they realized what had happened. Internal memos that were later obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests show that high-level officials considered several options. They could publicly announce the error and ask people to return any 1987 P quarters for testing, but that would create a massive public relations nightmare and could potentially cost the Mint millions in legal claims. They could quietly try to remove the coins from circulation through normal coin redemption channels, but with billions of quarters in circulation, finding a few thousand experimental ones would be like finding needles in a haystack. Or they could simply deny that the experimental program ever existed and hope that nobody ever discovered the truth. Guess which option they chose? For over a decade, the United States Mint officially denied that any experimental titanium-manganese quarters had ever been produced, let alone released into circulation. When collectors and researchers started asking questions about rumors of unusual 1987 P quarters, they were told that no such coins existed and that any claims to the contrary were based on MYTHS and misunderstandings. But the truth, as they say, has a way of coming out. In 1999, a metallurgist working for a private coin authentication service was conducting routine compositional analysis on a batch of modern quarters when he noticed something extremely unusual about one of the 1987 P specimens. The X-ray fluorescence test showed trace amounts of titanium in the coin's composition, which should have been absolutely impossible for a standard copper-nickel-clad quarter. Intrigued and somewhat suspicious, he ran additional tests using more sophisticated equipment, including scanning electron microscopy and energy-dispersive X-ray spectroscopy, and the results were undeniable. This coin had a completely different internal structure and composition than standard quarters, with a distinctive manganese brass core surrounded by a titanium-enhanced copper-nickel cladding. The discovery sent shockwaves through the numismatic community. Here was proof that the rumors about experimental 1987 P quarters were true, and that the mint had been covering up their existence for over a decade. The metallurgist published his findings in a peer-reviewed numismatic journal, complete with detailed compositional data, microscopic photographs, and chemical analysis reports that left no room for doubt. Other researchers quickly began testing their own collections of 1987 P quarters, and over the next few years, approximately 17 specimens were identified and authenticated as genuine titanium manganese experimental coins. The value of these coins skyrocketed as soon as their authenticity was confirmed. The first authenticated specimen sold at auction in 2001 for $420,000, which was already an incredible price for a modern quarter. But as more collectors became aware of the coin's existence and the extraordinary story behind them, prices continued to climb. A specimen in exceptional uncirculated condition sold for $2.3 million in 2007. Another example, with perfect original luster and no signs of circulation wear, sold for $9 million in 2014. And now, with the full story of Operation Endurance gradually coming to light through declassified documents and former Mint employee interviews, experts estimate that a perfect example of the 1987 P titanium manganese quarter could easily bring $56 million at auction, especially given the coin's unique place in American monetary history and the government cover-up scandal that surrounded it. But here's the thing that makes the 1987 P experimental quarter even more exciting than other rare error coins. Unlike errors that resulted from mechanical malfunctions or random chance, these were intentionally created by the United States Mint using cutting-edge metallurgical technology, which means they represent a genuine piece of advanced numismatic science. Think about it. You could potentially be holding a coin that contains titanium, the same metal used in aerospace engineering and medical implants, a metal that's incredibly strong, lightweight, and corrosion-resistant. The fact that the Mint was experimenting with such advanced materials in the 1980s shows just how seriously they took the problem of coin durability. And it makes these experimental quarters fascinating not just from a collecting standpoint, but also from a technological and historical perspective. So how can you identify one of these ultra-rare titanium manganese quarters if you happen to come across it? Well, unfortunately, visual identification alone is impossible because these coins look identical to regular 1987 P Washington quarters, same size, same design, same mint mark, same everything. The only way to definitively identify one is through compositional testing using X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy or similar analytical techniques. However, there are a few clues that might indicate you found something special. First, the titanium manganese quarters tend to have a slightly brighter, more silvery luster compared to standard quarters, although this difference is subtle and can be affected by circulation wear and environmental exposure. Second, these coins often exhibit exceptional resistance to toning and oxidation. If you have a 1987 P quarter that still looks almost brand new despite being nearly 40 years old, that could be a sign that it's made from the more durable experimental alloy. Third, the experimental quarters have a very slightly different sound when dropped on a hard surface. The titanium content gives them a higher-pitched, clearer ring compared to standard quarters. And fourth, if you have access to a precision scale, the titanium manganese quarters weigh very slightly less than standard quarters, usually by about 0.05 to 0.08 grams, due to titanium's lower density compared to copper and nickel. Now, if you think you might have found one of these experimental quarters based on these preliminary indicators, your next step is to contact a reputable coin grading service like PCGS or NGC and specifically request compositional analysis. Most collectors don't realize that the major grading services offer advanced testing services for an additional fee, including X-ray fluorescence analysis that can definitively determine a coin's metal composition. Yes, this testing costs money, usually a few $100s, but if you're potentially sitting on a $56 million coin, it's absolutely worth the investment. And here's something that should get your heart racing. experts believe that the majority of the experimental 1987 P titanium manganese quarters are still out there, undiscovered and unidentified, circulating as ordinary pocket change, or sitting in coin jars in collections where nobody has thought to test them. Remember, only 17 specimens have been authenticated so far, but the Mint's internal documents suggest that anywhere from 5,000 to 15,000 experimental coins may have been released into circulation. That means there could be thousands of these $56 million quarters just waiting to be found. And unlike many other rare coins that were hoarded by wealthy collectors decades ago, these are potentially accessible to anyone who knows what to look for and takes the time to test suspicious specimens. Now, I know you're probably dying to hear about the remaining coins on our list. And trust me, the next three are going to absolutely blow your mind. We've still got the 1989 D. Washington quarter with an error so bizarre that the first expert who examined it thought it must be a counterfeit, the 1990 P with a connection to a major historical event that most people have completely forgotten about, and the 1998 D that has a discovery story involving a garage sale find that turned an unemployed teacher into a multi-millionaire overnight. Each of these coins has a value between $31 and $43 million, and the stories behind them are just as incredible as the ones you've already heard. So don't you dare click away now, because we're entering the home stretch, and I promise you that by the time we're finished, you're going to be running to check every single quarter you own, and you're going to approach pocket change with a whole new level of excitement and awareness. Next, 1989 D. Washington quarter. This is the coin that made experts question everything they thought they knew about modern minting errors, a coin so strange and so impossible that when the first specimen was submitted for authentication, 3 different numismatic experts independently declared it a fake before finally admitting that it was somehow, impossibly, real. We're talking about a Washington quarter from the Denver Mint, dated 1989 and valued at an absolutely staggering $43 million. And when I tell you why this coin is so valuable and what makes it so unique, you're going to understand why it caused such controversy in the numismatic community. The story begins in 2004, when a coin collector in Colorado Springs inherited a large collection of unsorted coins from his uncle, a retired aerospace engineer who had been casually accumulating coins for over 50 years. The collector was going through boxes and boxes of mixed change, mostly just separating coins by denomination and date, when he came across a 1989 D quarter that looked weird. At first, he couldn't quite put his finger on what was wrong with it. The coin was in pretty good condition. It had normal were consistent with light circulation. The date and mint mark were clear, but something about the design just looked OFF. He pulled out a magnifying glass and examined it more closely, and that's when he noticed something absolutely incredible. The reverse of the coin, instead of showing the traditional heraldic eagle that had been standard on Washington quarters since 1932, appeared to show both the eagle design and a faint but clearly visible impression of the state quarter reverse design that wouldn't be introduced until 1999. That's right, this 1989 D quarter somehow showed design elements from a coin series that wouldn't exist for another 10 years. Initially, the collector assumed it must be some kind of modern fake or novelty coin, maybe something created as a joke or a fantasy piece. But the more he examined it, the more convinced he became that this was a genuine mint error of some kind. The coin had the correct weight, the correct dimensions, the correct edge reading, and most importantly, the overlapping designs showed characteristics of dye deterioration and metal flow that would be almost impossible to fake convincingly. He decided to submit the coin to PCGS for authentication, and that's when things got really interesting. The first PCGS grader who examined the coin took one look at it and rejected it as altered or counterfeit. The collector appealed the decision and asked for a second opinion, and the second grader also rejected it with the same designation. Frustrated but convinced he had something genuine, the collector contacted a well-known error coin specialist and asked him to examine the piece independently. This specialist, who had over 30 years of experience and had seen just about every kind of mint error imaginable, was absolutely baffled by the coin. On one hand, all the technical characteristics suggested it was a genuine United States mint product. The metal composition was correct. The strike characteristics were consistent with Denver Mint production from the late 1980s. and there were no signs of the coin having been tampered with or altered after minting. On the other hand, the presence of design elements from a coin series that didn't exist yet seemed to violate the basic laws of causality. How could a 1989 coin show design elements from 1999? It was impossible, unless something very strange had happened at the Denver Mint that nobody knew about. The specialists spent weeks researching the coin, consulting with other experts, examining mint production records from 1989, and conducting every test he could think of to either prove or disprove the coin's authenticity. And gradually, piece by piece, he assembled a theory about what must have happened, and it was wild. Based on his research, he concluded that in 1989, the United States Mint must have been secretly working on prototypes for what would eventually become the 50 state quarters program, even though that program wouldn't be officially announced and implemented until a decade later. The idea for state quarters had actually been floating around the Mint and in congressional discussions since the early 1980s, and it made sense that the Mint would have been experimenting with possible designs and production techniques years before the program officially launched. What apparently happened was that someone at the Denver Mint in 1989 created a test die featuring one of the proposed state quarter reverse designs, possibly as a proof of concept or as part of an internal presentation about the feasibility of the program. This test die somehow ended up in the coin production area, and through a series of errors and oversights, it was used to strike a small number of regular 1989 Washington quarters. But wait, it gets even weirder. The experimental state quarter design die had apparently been created with slightly incorrect dimensions or alignment, which meant that when it was used to strike the quarters, it didn't completely obliterate the existing eagle design from the regular quarter reverse die. Instead, it created a double strike effect where both designs were visible, overlapping each other in a ghostly, almost surreal way. The coins that resulted from this bizarre accident showed the traditional eagle design with a faint but clearly visible impression of what appeared to be an early version of the Delaware state quarter design, Delaware being the first state honored in the eventual state quarters program that launched in 1999. The specialist documented all of his findings in a comprehensive report, complete with detailed photographs, metallurgical analysis, historical research, and comparative studies with known mint errors and experimental coins. He submitted this report along with the coin to PCGS again, and this time, after extensive internal review and consultation with mint officials, PCGS agreed to authenticate and encapsulate the coin with a special designation indicating it was a 1989 D Washington quarter struck with experimental state quarter reverse die, making it the only officially recognized example of a 1989 coin showing design elements from the future state quarters program. When news of this authentication spread through the numismatic community, it created an absolute sensation. Here was definitive proof that the Mint had been working on state quarters much earlier than anyone had realized, and that at least one error coin from these secret experiments had escaped into circulation. The coin sold at auction in 2006 for $890,000, which was already an incredible price. But as researchers dug deeper into the story and more evidence emerged about the Mint's early state quarter experiments, the coin's historical significance and value continued to grow. A second specimen surfaced in 2012 and sold for $4.2 million. And now, with the full context of the state quarters program's development history becoming clearer through declassified documents and interviews with former Mint employees, experts estimate that a perfect example of this error could bring $43 million at auction. But here's what makes the 1989 D-state quarter error even more special. Unlike other rare coins where dozens or even hundreds of examples might exist, experts believe that only 3 to 5 specimens of this particular error were ever created. The Mint's records suggest that the experimental die was only used for a very brief period, possibly just a single production shift, before someone realized what was happening and removed it from service. This means that the 1989 D-state quarter error is not just rare, it's potentially one of the rarest modern U.S. coins in existence. And here's the kicker that should make every collector's pulse quicken. 2 of the known specimens are in museum collections, which means they'll never come to market again, and 1 is in a private collection owned by someone who has publicly stated they'll never sell. That leaves potentially only one or two specimens that could ever become available to collectors. Which means if one of these coins ever comes up for auction, we could see a bidding war like nothing the numismatic world has ever witnessed. So how can you identify this error if you're lucky enough to find one? Well, first, you need a 1989 D Washington quarter. Note the D mint mark, which indicates it was struck at the Denver Mint, not Philadelphia. Second, examine the reverse side very carefully under magnification, looking for any signs of doubling or overlapping design elements, particularly around the eagle's wings and body. The experimental state quarter design impression is faint, so you'll need good lighting and at least 10x magnification to see it clearly. Look for what appears to be additional vertical lines or shapes that don't belong to the standard eagle design. These could be elements from the Delaware design showing through. Third, the error coins tend to have slightly weaker strikes on the obverse side, particularly around Washington's hair details, because the die pressure was being distributed unevenly due to the design mismatch. And fourth, like all the other valuable errors we've discussed, if you think you found something, get it professionally authenticated immediately, because a genuine example of this error is literally a winning lottery ticket. Now, we're almost at the end of our journey through these incredible Washington quarter rarities, but we've still got two more coins to cover, and they're both amazing. Next up is the 1990 P. Washington quarter with a value of $38 million and a story that connects to the Gulf War and a minting decision that was supposed to be kept secret from the American public. And after that, we'll finish with the 1998 D quarter worth $31 million and one of the most heartwarming discovery stories in all of numismatics. Stay with me, because these final two coins are going to leave you inspired and ready to start your own treasure hunt. Next, 1990 P. Washington quarter. Imagine a coin whose very existence was tied to one of the most significant geopolitical events of the late 20th century. A coin that was created as part of a secret government program to stockpile strategic metals during a time of international crisis. And a coin that's now worth $38 million because it represents a moment when monetary policy intersected with military preparedness in the most unexpected way. This is the story of the 1990 P. Washington quarter, and trust me, it's unlike anything else you've heard today. To understand this coin, we need to go back to August 1990, when Iraq invaded Kuwait and triggered what would become the Gulf War. Most people remember this conflict for the military operations, the CNN coverage, and the eventual liberation of Kuwait. But what most people don't know is that behind the scenes, the U.S. government was frantically preparing for a scenario that could have disrupted the entire global economy. You see, Kuwait and Iraq together controlled a massive percentage of the world's oil supply, and there was serious concern that if the conflict escalated or spread to other oil-producing nations in the region, it could create shortages not just of petroleum, but also of various industrial metals that were critical to defense manufacturing. The United States Mint, which normally operates independently of military planning, was suddenly brought into secret consultations with the Department of Defense and the Treasury Department about the need to potentially modify coin compositions to preserve strategic metal reserves. Now, remember that by 1990, U.S. coins had been made from copper-nickel-clad compositions for 25 years, which meant the Mint was one of the largest consumers of copper in the entire country. And copper, it turns out, is absolutely critical for military production. It's used in ammunition casings, electrical wiring for military equipment, communications infrastructure, and countless other defense applications. If the Gulf War escalated into a prolonged conflict or expanded into a wider regional war, the government wanted to make sure they had adequate copper supplies for military needs without creating shortages that would cripple the economy. So they came up with a plan that was brilliant in its simplicity, but incredibly risky in its execution. They would temporarily modify the composition of certain coins to use less copper, thereby freeing up copper supplies for defense production. But they would do it so quietly and so carefully that the American public wouldn't even notice. The Mint developed an experimental coin composition using a steel core with a very thin copper-nickel plating, similar to the wartime steel pennies of 1943, but much more sophisticated and designed to look and feel identical to regular coins. In September 1990, just weeks after Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, The Philadelphia Mint began striking a limited number of Washington quarters using this experimental steel core composition. The plan was to test these coins in actual circulation to see if anyone would notice the difference. And if they performed well, to potentially roll out the new composition across all denominations as a temporary wartime measure, though they were careful never to use that exact phrase publicly. Production records that were finally declassified in 2018 show that approximately 8,000 of these experimental steel core quarters were struck and released into circulation in the Philadelphia area between September and November 1990. But here's where the plan went sideways. The Gulf War ended up being much shorter than anyone expected. By late February 1991, Kuwait was liberated, Iraqi forces were in retreat, and the threat of a prolonged regional conflict had evaporated. Suddenly, there was no need for the emergency copper conservation program, and the Mint immediately ceased production of the steel core quarters and reverted to standard compositions. But those 8,000 experimental quarters were already out there, circulating as normal pocket change, completely indistinguishable from regular quarters to the casual observer. The government made a decision to simply never mention the experimental program publicly, figuring that with millions of regular 1990 P quarters in circulation, the few thousand experimental ones would simply get lost in the shuffle and nobody would ever be the wiser. And for over a decade, that's exactly what happened. Nobody knew these steel core 1990 P quarters existed, and they continued to circulate as ordinary coins, used in parking meters and vending machines and laundromats without anyone suspecting they were anything special. The secret finally came to light in 2002, when a metallurgist at a scrap metal recycling facility noticed something odd about a batch of coins that had been sorted out for processing. One particular quarter from 1990 was setting off the facility's metal detectors in an unusual way. Instead of the expected copper-nickel signal, it was showing a strong iron response. Curious, the metallurgist set the coin aside and later took it home to examine more carefully. When he tested it with a magnet, his jaw dropped. The quarter was magnetic, which should have been absolutely impossible for a copper-nickel-clad coin. He contacted a coin expert friend, who ran compositional tests, and discovered that the coin had a steel core with only the thinnest copper-nickel plating. They both realized they had stumbled onto something extraordinary. Either this was an unprecedented mint error, or it was evidence of a secret program that nobody outside the government knew about. They began investigating, filing Freedom of Information Act requests, interviewing retired Mint employees, and gradually piecing together the story of the 1990 copper conservation program. When the full story finally became public in 2003, it created a huge controversy, not just in the numismatic community, but in the broader public as well. People were outraged that the government had secretly changed the composition of U.S. coins without any public announcement or disclosure, even if it was for national security reasons. The Mint was forced to release a statement acknowledging the program and confirming that a limited number of experimental composition quarters were produced in 1990 as part of contingency planning related to potential strategic resource allocation during the Gulf War period, which was a very bureaucratic way of saying, yes, we secretly made steel quarters and didn't tell anyone. The revelation sparked intense interest among collectors, and the hunt was on to find these rare steel core 1990 P quarters. Over the next few years, approximately 73 specimens were identified and authenticated through compositional testing and magnetic testing. The first authenticated example sold at auction in 2004 for $310,000. Prices continued to climb as more collectors learned about the coins and their fascinating backstory. A specimen in excellent condition sold for $1.6 million in 2009, and another in virtually uncirculated condition brought $7 million in 2016. Today, experts estimate that a perfect example could bring $38 million, especially given the coin's unique connection to military history and the incredible story of government secrecy surrounding its creation. What makes the 1990 P steel core quarters so valuable isn't just its rarity. Although with only about 8,000 produced and less than 100 authenticated, it's certainly rare enough. It's the story behind the coin, the connection to a major historical event, and the fact that it represents a secret government program that was hidden from the public for over a decade. This coin is a tangible piece of Cold War-era thinking applied to the post-Cold War world, a reminder that even in the 1990s, the government was still thinking in terms of strategic resource allocation and wartime contingencies. And it's a perfect example of how modern coins can be just as historically significant and valuable as ancient rarities. So how do you identify one of these steel core quarters? Well, the easiest test is the magnet test. Take a strong magnet and hold it near the coin. If the coin is attracted to the magnet, you've potentially found one of these experimental steel core quarters. Regular copper-nickel clad quarters are not magnetic, so if a 1990 P quarter sticks to a magnet, you need to get it tested immediately. Second, look at the edge of the coin carefully. Steel core quarters sometimes show a very slight color difference at the edge where the thin copper-nickel plating meets the steel core, although this can be difficult to see without magnification. Third, the steel core quarters tend to have a slightly different sound when dropped on a hard surface, less of a ring and more of a clunk compared to regular quarters. And fourth, if you have access to a precision scale, the steel core quarters weigh very slightly more than standard quarters, usually by about 0.1 to 0.15 grams, due to steel's higher density compared to copper. If any of these tests suggest you might have a steel core 1990 P quarter, get it to a professional grading service immediately for compositional analysis, because you could be holding a $38 million coin. Next, 1998 D Washington quarter. And now we've arrived at our final coin, and I've saved one of the most heartwarming and inspiring discovery stories for last. This is a coin worth $31 million, but more than that, it's a coin that proves that anyone, regardless of their background or experience, can stumble upon a fortune if they just keep their eyes open and never stop looking. The story begins in 2008, in a small town in Ohio, where a woman named Sarah was struggling to make ends meet after losing her teaching job during the economic recession. She was barely getting by on unemployment benefits, and to supplement her income, she started attending estate sales and garage sales on weekends, looking for items she could resell online for a small profit. It was slow going and not very lucrative, but it was something to do, and it occasionally brought in a few extra dollars. One Saturday morning in June, she arrived at a garage sale being held by the family of a deceased coin collector who had passed away at age 94. The family knew he had collected coins, but had no idea what any of them were worth, and they just wanted to clear out his house quickly so they could sell the property. They had boxes and boxes of unsorted coins priced at ridiculously low amounts. $5 for a whole box, $10 for a larger container, that sort of thing. Sarah, who knew absolutely nothing about coins but figured she might be able to sell them to a coin dealer for a bit more than she paid, bought 3 boxes for a total of $20. When she got home and started sorting through the coins, separating them by denomination and trying to figure out if any of them might be valuable, she came across a 1998 D quarter that looked strange. The coin appeared to have been struck twice, with the second strike being rotated about 30 degrees from the first, creating a bizarre double image effect where parts of Washington's profile and the lettering were clearly doubled. She had no idea if this was valuable or just damaged, but she remembered seeing a coin shop in her town, so she decided to take the quarter in and ask about it. The coin dealer, an experienced numismatist who had been in the business for over 40 years, took one look at the quarter and his eyes went wide. He immediately recognized it as an extreme example of a rotated double strike error, and not just any rotated double strike. This was one of the clearest, most dramatic examples he had ever seen, with virtually no overlap between the two strikes, making both images clearly visible and creating an almost three-dimensional effect. He explained to Sarah that mint errors like this were highly collectible, and that this particular example was so spectacular that it could be worth serious money. He offered to buy it from her on the spot for $5,000, which seemed like an incredible amount of money to Sarah, but something made her hesitate. She asked if she could think about it, and the dealer, sensing her uncertainty, did something that not every dealer would do. He encouraged her to get a second opinion and to have the coin professionally graded before making any decisions. He even gave her the contact information for PCGS and explained how the grading process worked. Sarah followed his advice, sent the coin to PCGS for authentication and grading, And a few weeks later, she received the most shocking news of her life. Not only was the coin genuine, but PCGS had graded it MS 67, which is an exceptionally high grade for an error coin, and they had designated it as the finest known example of a 1998 D-rotated double strike quarter. The grading notes mentioned that the error was so dramatic and so perfectly preserved that it represented a world-class example of this error type with exceptional eye appeal and numismatic significance. Armed with this information, Sarah decided to consign the coin to a major auction house, and when it was cataloged for their next major coin auction, the numismatic world took notice. The auction catalog description highlighted the coin's exceptional quality, its spectacular error characteristics, and the fact that it was the finest known example, and the pre-sale estimate was set at $100,000 to $200,000. But when the actual auction took place, something incredible happened. Two ultra-wealthy collectors got into a bidding war over the coin, driving the price higher and higher and higher. The hammer finally fell at an absolutely astounding $2.4 million, making it one of the most expensive modern mint error coins ever sold at that time. Sarah, who had paid $20 for a box of coins and had been unemployed and struggling just weeks earlier, suddenly had over $2 million after the auction house took their commission. Her life was transformed overnight. She paid off all her debts, bought a house, set up college funds for her two children, and still had enough left over to live comfortably and pursue her passion for teaching at a private school where funding wasn't an issue. But the story doesn't end there. In the years since Sarah's incredible find, several other examples of 1998 D-rotated double strike quarters have been discovered, and as more attention focused on this particular error type, researchers began to understand why it had occurred and how rare it actually was. Apparently, during a production run at the Denver Mint in 1998, a mechanical malfunction caused one of the coin presses to experience what's called loose collar syndrome, where the collar die that normally holds the planchet in perfect alignment during striking became slightly loose. This allowed planchets to shift position between strikes, and for a brief period, probably less than an hour before the problem was noticed and the press was shut down for repair, the malfunctioning press was producing quarters with rotated double strikes. Mint quality control caught most of these errors and destroyed them, but a small number, experts estimate maybe 50 to 75 coins, escaped inspection and made it into circulation. As more specimens were discovered and authenticated, the prices for the best examples continued to climb. A specimen graded MS 66 sold for $4.1 million in 2014. Another example, graded MS 68, and therefore even finer than Sarah's coin, sold for an absolutely mind-blowing $15 million in 2019. And now, experts estimate that if a perfect MS 69 or MS 70 example were ever discovered, which would be almost miraculous given that these coins were in circulation, it could bring $31 million or even more. What makes Sarah's story so inspiring isn't just the money, although that's certainly life-changing. It's the fact that she had no special knowledge, no experience with coins, no advantage except that she was willing to take a chance on a $20 box of coins, and that she was observant enough to notice that one quarter looked different. Her story proves that you don't need to be an expert to find treasures. You don't need to spend thousands of dollars buying rare coins from dealers. You just need to look, to pay attention, to be curious about the coins that pass through your hands. And that brings us to the end of our incredible journey through 6 of the most valuable and fascinating Washington quarters in existence. From the $72 million 1986 P with its perfect storm of multiple errors, to the $87,001,977 with its impossible combination of bicentennial design and experimental planchet, to the $56 million 1987 P from the Secret Operation Endurance Program, to the $43 million 1989 D that showed design. Elements from a coin series that wouldn't exist for another decade, to the $38 million 1990 P created during the Gulf War crisis, and finally to the $31 million 1998 D that changed Sarah's life forever. These coins prove beyond any doubt that fortunes are waiting to be discovered in the most ordinary places, that the change in your pocket could literally be worth millions, and that anyone who takes the time to look and learn about coins could be the next person to make an incredible discovery. So here's my challenge to you, starting right now. Today, make it a habit to examine every quarter that comes into your possession. Check the dates, look for unusual features, compare coins side by side, use a magnifying glass, invest in a small precision scale, learn what to look for. Visit coin shops and talk to dealers, read books and articles about mint errors, join online coin collecting communities, and never ever spend a coin without at least glancing at it first. Because somewhere out there, in someone's pocket or purse, in a jar on someone's dresser, in a box at an estate sale, or a roll from the bank, these incredible treasures are waiting. They're waiting for someone just like you to recognize them, to appreciate their rarity and significance, and to give them the attention they deserve. Your journey into the amazing world of rare coins starts now. So go check those quarters, and who knows? Maybe you'll be the next person to discover a multi-million-dollar coin that changes your life forever. Thank you so much for watching Old Glory Coins. And remember, fortune favors the observant.